back to another episode of Le Bon Vie Champagne TV. This week I'm continuing to look at champenois who have interesting practices with the storage or the management of their reserve wines. This is the base wine from previous years which the Maison stores for future blending into a cuvee. Of course, any blending of previous year's base wines with the current harvest instantly classifies the cuvee as a non-vintage wine, which is a blend of multiple vintages to create a wine that's designed to be the signature style of any champagne house. When I think about champagne houses with a real focus on their reserve wines, I instantly call to mind houses like Charles Heidsieck, who have a rich addition of 40% reserve wines of generous age, and also Louis Roederer. But I've also selected the Grand Reserve of grower boutique Bérêche Fils this month to take the pride of place in our Champagne Club. Why? Bérêche Fils have a very unique method of managing their reserve wines, but I will get to that shortly. Firstly, I'd like to give you an understanding and an introduction to the house. More and more, I'm hearing about this vineyard located in the village of Lutz, which has been making wine in the region since 1847. Initially, very small quantities were released from the Maison, but with some clever acquisitions, that's allowed the house to grow their land holdings to a respectable 9.5 hectares. And that's divided equally across the Pinot Noir, Meunier, and the elegant Chardonnay. In addition to their increased output and the subsequent global distribution, we have a new burst of energy and character coming from the wines of the house, which is largely due to the influence of the next generation of winemakers who are toiling in the vines, Raphael and brother Vincent, who's been managing the vineyard since 2008. There is a natural maintenance program that transcends from the vines to the wines of the house. Absolutely no pesticides, no herbicides are utilised, and the boys are minimising the use of sulfites as much as possible. The wines are aged in a combination of oak barrels, preferably 300-litre Burgundy barrels, and also cement tanks which have been enamel lined. All of the wines are blocked from any malolactic fermentation, which means essentially that they're keeping a zesty acid line and they maintain a freshness and a beautiful minerality within the champagnes. But let's talk about the reserve wine, which is the topic of this week. The wine that we're tasting is the Brut Réserve non-vintage. Now, very few winemakers in the appellation of Champagne utilise the method of perpetual blending with their reserve wine. This is a Solera system of sorts where base wines from the current vintage are added to a vat or a tank which holds a portion of reserve wines from previous years. A portion of that vat is drawn down and then it's blended with the current vintage to create the non-vintage cuvee for the Maison. That vat is then topped up with the base wines, the Vin Clairs from the current cycle, the current vintage. At Bérêche Fils, they've been drawing on a perpetual reserve system with wines dating back to 1985, adding this increased depth and complexity to a wine that's relatively youthful, spending actually only 24 months on lees. Now the wine is about equal proportions across the three grapes, with 20% of the base wines aged in oak barrel. Balance, as I said earlier, cement tanks with an enamel lining. But a very generous portion of that cuvee is 30% of reserve wine. Again, absolutely no malolactic fermentation in this wine and a very conservative dosage of 7 grams per litre, which is noted on the back. I must admit, fantastic labelling on this house with everything you need to know about this particular cuvee being on the back of the label, which tends to be the trend these days with grower champagnes. The champagne has a pink tinge, has a very fine mousse and is generating a vivacious stream of delicate bubbles in the glass. Approximately equal proportions of the three grapes, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, with a light dosage of about 7 grams. But of course, a very generous application of about 30% reserve wine. The champagne is really intense on the nose. Really rich red fruits and spice, white pepper. It has this quite unusual note of halva or a tahini, this beautiful almond with vanilla. But it also has very light notes of strawberry and some intense cooked red apple. Very layered, very punchy. It's a champagne that shows loads of freshness and finesse, but real power. The wine is zippy and zesty. The blocking of the malolactic fermentation really lets the wine sing on the palate. The fruit purity shines through and retains all of its freshness. It's youthful with complexity. It's a conundrum. The champagne has really evolved since I first tasted it this morning to when I'm retasting it now. This morning when I opened the wine, it was fresh. It was really crisp, this beautiful line of acid. Now I'm seeing the evolution of the wine. Beautiful almond, biscuit, honey. It's developed and it's very, very full-bodied. Sensational wines and certainly very, very interesting winemakers in the next generation of Bérêche FE. Perpetual blending of reserves in champagne is quite rare, and I suggest it's probably due to the risks associated with keeping the base wines of considerable age for some time. You do have all of your eggs in one basket. If you're starting with base wines that are particularly old and they start to show fault due to their age, then this is a risk. You have the chance of losing your whole reserve and you may need to start from scratch. Not to mention, of course, the cost of storing such reserve wines. But smaller houses with a meticulous focus, such as Bérêche FE, are succeeding with this method, which is making for far more complex and far more rich wines. If you have any questions on this wine, or if you would like any further information on the Vineyard or the use of reserve wine in Champagne, feel free to write to us at info@lbvchampagneclub.com. We look forward to you joining us in the next episode as we focus on the Orbe region of Champagne. Until then, please keep exploring and enjoying fascinating wines of Champagne.